Let me put my microphone on. Thank you for being here this evening. We'll go ahead and start this study session, and I think, Mac, are you presenting? All right, Mac.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have enough time to go through this presentation, so as you have questions or comments, please feel free to interject as we go through. The purpose of this presentation today is kind of to go over our right-of-way management and kind of how we treat the right-of-way as an asset for the city. The purpose of this meeting, or this presentation, will be to go over proposed right-of-way ordinance that the Public Works Department has been working on. It will explain some of the reasons for updating and pursuing that path of an ordinance. It will also outline benefits to the city and to other key stakeholders within the right-of-way. And we'll also discuss changes to our engineering design standards that reflect those goals. And so one of the reasons that we would want to update this is to increase protection of the city's infrastructure in the public right-of-way, also to provide clear enforceable rules for all right-of-way users, and then to ensure fair cost recovery for entities impacting the city. So I kind of wanted to talk about this as kind of a scale, right? We think about this as an asset, very similar to our house, right? On our house, we might do improvements. We might allow a cable company to come in and drill a hole to install cable for our TV. And so this is kind of a similar situation that we have to look at the right-of-way. What are the benefits that we get for allowing utility companies to come into the right-of-way? We get safe, clean water. I think everybody wants that, needs that. We get wastewater removal and treatment, high-speed internet, gas for homes, flood control measures as they install storm sewer and other infrastructure. And then also, obviously, as those things develop, that encourages new homes and businesses to also build out, right? And so those are some of the benefits that the city and the residents that live here get when we have utility companies using the right-of-way. The other side of that and the scale is weighing what are the city's financial responsibilities to its residents and to itself. And so right-of-way maintenance is a big financial responsibility, and that includes all those assets. So we may think of the right-of-way as just the road, but there's a lot of things that encompass the right-of-way. We have landscaping, we have that storm sewer infrastructure, things like sidewalk. Anything that's in the right-of-way is really an asset that the city has to maintain. The other thing that the city has a responsibility to provide is emergency response, right? And so as roads are worked on and things are done in the roadway, the city's obligation to provide those services is impacted. Another responsibility that the city has is providing safe and efficient transit corridors, right? And so we want to develop a transportation system that allows and encourages future growth and attracts the kinds of businesses and the things that benefit the residents of the city. And so this presentation is kind of a presentation of what we think some key decisions need to be made to ensure that scale is balanced for the community and the residents. So we're going to go over the current right-of-way management process, maybe some of the common issues that we face today, and then talk about some of the collaboration that we've had so far with engineers, utilities, and contractors in order to develop a plan on how we're going to better manage this moving forward. So I kind of want to just go over the process that as it happens today. And so what happens is a new utility improvement is planned by either a utility company just to increase their service, or maybe by a developer who's putting in new homes or a business. And then those improvements are submitted to the city for review. The city then takes that permit application and reviews it and may provide specific conditions for how long it's able to be opened, what time frames, maybe the types of work methodologies that are used to install in the right-of-way. And that's kind of represented in that second circle there. That's all done at kind of a planning or a pre-construction level. And then right in between those two circles is where it transitions from a planning to what's actually happening in the field, right? And so that's when the contractor performs the work. During that time, the city's kind of overseeing that work, ensuring that it's going according to schedule, things like that. And then the city performs a final inspection of the work to ensure that that right-of-way has been now left or returned to the city in an acceptable state. Then a year after, we have a practice to go and revisit that site, make sure that all those restorations that were done are still holding up. And then at that time, that permit is administratively closed. And so I kind of wanted to go over how other cities manage their right-of-way and how they do that process, right? It's a similar process no matter where you go, but different cities do it a little bit differently. So right now, we handle most of that process in our public works staff. We don't necessarily have a formal right-of-way team, but we just handle it through our engineering staff, and also some of the permitting intake is handled through our development center to process those permits and kind of collect that information up front. You can see here, I'm not going to go over each one, but different cities kind of do it differently. A lot of them have a dedicated right-of-way staff or right-of-way team within their engineering departments, and that's a typical practice for most of the cities in the area. Oh, the other thing that we would like to recommend is that currently the city management office is doing an operational assessment. I think it would be a good opportunity to maybe look at how our current staff is operating today and see if there's any ways we can make some improvements and efficiencies to help both the permit applicants and the city move forward. So let's talk about some of the increasing issues that we're having in the right-of-way. We are set to probably do the most amount of right-of-way permits that we've done in at least the last 10 years that I gathered data this year. And so we're seeing more and more right-of-way use. And so as that increases, we're seeing just more frequencies of the problems, right? We have a certain number of problems, and as you use the right-of-way more, those problems grow. So we're noticing, these are just some examples, not necessarily specifics, but things like trench plates being able to be installed correctly, right? You can see in this picture that's a pretty hazardous scenario, and so we want to try to avoid things like that by standardizing and requiring certain aspects of work. Another thing that we're finding is that work is being performed, and we're not getting the restoration that's supposed to occur. So you can see in this picture in the middle there, we know that work was performed. There's a couple contractors, you can even see their marks, where we definitely know that somebody was in there working, but there's so much work occurring and it happened and there was no city oversight, that we don't know who's responsible to fix that, and it becomes a debate between all the different utility users on who's truly responsible, right? So at the end of the day, the city just has to come and fix it. We can't just leave a pit opening. And that's time and money and city resources that really shouldn't need to be spent. Another thing that we're seeing kind of often is construction work occurring in the public right-of-way without that permit process occurring. The challenge and the worry there is that as that work's performed, if we're not aware of it and we're not catching that, if something is performed not up to standard, we have to come back and fix it, and there's no record on how to get that cost recompense to the city, right? And so again, the city's eating costs that really they shouldn't have to because of the work that they're not performing. So we kind of said, okay, let's take a look at this. Let's take a step back, figure out how to better process this going forward. And we decided to work with a firm that we work with often for our cost estimation for our CIP projects, which is Ryder Levitt Bucknell. And they also worked with Nino and Moore, who's a well-known geotechnical firm here based out of Tucson. And then we also wanted to seek out some comments from various professionals and utility companies. And so we worked with Arizona Water to send them our drafts, and Southwest Gas, as well as Ellison Mills, people that use the right-of-way a lot and might have some good constructive comments for us to use. And so the ordinance that we're looking at drafting is going to include some proposed key provisions. So the permit requirements, what we're looking to change is that a right-of-way occupancy permit will be required for all work within the right-of-way. So this may require a city code amendment, as today there's not anything that says that somebody working the right-of-way inherently needs a permit. We'll also establish an open occupancy permit for franchise utility companies. So a lot of our franchise utility companies, their utility or their franchise agreement states that they have the ability to pull a kind of a citywide blanket permit to perform maintenance activities and such. And so we would create probably a new permit to address just those specific cases. It would also revise and instill new potential permits for small temporary uses, things like news racks, sales. As we kind of expand the downtown area, those permits for people that are going to use the right-of-way to provide tables or things like that for customers. Those would be as a separate right-of-way use permit rather than what we would have today, which is just work in the right-of-way permits, and it's not very applicable. It would also establish a permit for special event and block parties, things of that nature to allow that to be planned and coordinate with all the other right-of-way users accordingly. It also incorporates a holiday blackout schedule, which targets specific holidays, essentially long holiday weekends, making sure that those roadways are open and free as possible the days before and the days after those holiday weekends. It would change some of our application processes as well. It would require traffic control plans for any of the devices that are installed in public right-of-way. It would also establish a standardized notification process for city departments, impacted businesses, and residences. We kind of don't have a very standardized process across the board on how that works today, and we'd like to address that with this ordinance on who needs to be notified, when, and how. It also would determine what events need to be submitted on a closure event map, what things need to be included, and if we need to potentially upload those closures to the Arizona 511 system. The city has the ability to participate in that, and the beauty there is we would be able to essentially communicate with Google and Waze and those kind of things, so that if you put in something in your Google Maps and it takes you there, it already knows that there's an event closed there, so it might direct you and better use that system. It would also establish some restoration and securities and enforcement standards. So it would place restrictions on cutting into new paved roadways. We'll discuss that a little bit later on why that's problematic. It will require bonding or other securities to work on the right-of-way, and so the goal here is that as contractors are going in and performing work, if something happens where they've damaged, let's just say landscaping, and the city has to come back and replace it, there's a cost mitigation effort that can occur to where they're giving back the cost to the city for those type of things. It also would kind of more clearly define adherence to those restoration standards, and it would establish penalties for non-compliance. So if somebody continually uses the right-of-way without pulling those permits that they're supposed to, there would be a system in place on steps on how to correct that. It would also be a little bit more clear on the revocation of those permits, cease and desist orders, and an appeals process if they feel like something is not being done fairly. So this section's kind of going to talk about those pavement cuts and why that's a challenge for us, especially on new roadways. So one of the things I want to talk about was our pavement condition index, and so that's essentially a way to measure how healthy a road is between a 0 and 100, and that's based on the physical characteristics and the visual characteristics of the surface of the road. And I kind of wanted to draw attention to this kind of cycle that we have. And so what happens is you have a brand new road and it has a perfect score, right? It's 100. And as it degrades, the cost to rehab that road grows exponentially. And so what happens is when you have a pavement cut in the road, you create imperfections and the PCI score is lowered. Eventually those imperfections grow, you start to have cracks, potholes, pavement raveling. And so the corrective action to fix that is cut out a bigger section and replace that section. But now you're back in the same loop where, okay, we've cut out that section, but now there's still a pavement cut, and now you've just pushed it down the road. And so it kind of is a negative feedback loop that happens, and so we really want to prevent and avoid cuts on our new roads as much as possible, because that extends the life cycle as well as the maintenance costs to keep that road up and running and at a high PCI. So the proposed ordinance right now adopts a couple different pavement cut fees. And so this is where RLB and Nino and Moore come into this presentation. We worked with them to develop these fees, and I just want to draw your attention to the 7 categories that we decided to contribute to those fees. So one of those is our typical asphalt pavement maintenance. So what's the cost to maintain that road over the life cycle? As the road gets older and older, there's different costs associated with those, and there's different costs that need to occur at certain time frames of the road life. So maybe from 3 to 5 years, we need to do a slurry seal to cover that road to continue to have a long life cycle. It also the fees contributing were some traffic control plan reviews, third-party quality assurance, so all of those repairs and things that are done need to be tested and verified that they're being performed correctly. These fees also include city field engineering and inspections. They include plan review of the work. They also include a probability of rebuilding the trench, and so there's a factor built into there of how likely is that trench to fail in the future, even if everything's done correctly. A certain percentage of those trenches are still going to fail, and so I think they used about a 2% probability, and that was just based on their engineering recommendation of how many of those trenches will continue to fail even if they're installed. Then it also includes there should be a slash here, landscaping / irrigation repair. So if that cut occurs on a median, for example, you have to restore that median, including the landscaping and all the things that are associated there. Some things that we didn't want to consider, just because you get into some very large variables and they change a lot, is what are the costs to businesses, right? So if you put a cut in a road, in a brand new road, sure, there's the cut cost, but what's the cost now of potentially closing that driveway to the business for a day, or changing how many vehicles can now use that roadway efficiently? It's kind of hard to calculate that. It's a very specific, case scenario, but definitely a cost that should be considered as we kind of look at how we manage things. Another one is costs due to traffic interruptions. So, for example, if you close a road and now you have to do a detour of about a mile, what are the costs to the Casa Grande economy of how many added miles and gas dollars that now have to be included, right? So again, kind of hard to calculate, but something to think about as you manage the right-of-way. What are those other costs that maybe aren't included directly in this pavement cut? And so we grouped our roads into our different standard sections and then built costs based on the age of the road and that classification. And that's what's shown on this table. The other thing that the current ordinance attempts to tackle is right-of-way use fees. And so kind of going back to how do we manage, for example, the impacts to businesses when those kinds of things occur. Optimally, we want people constructing in the right-of-way out of the right-of-way as soon as possible. That reduce risks, that reduce costs to the business, that reduce costs to the city. And so we want to encourage people to get out of the right-of-way as fast as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to essentially charge based on the usage that they're planning to use. The reason we set it up this way is that we feel this is a good way to encourage those right-of-way users to minimize their impact as much as possible. If there's a way that they can leave a lane open, this encourages them to do that versus shutting the entire road down. Or can they just do a shoulder closure instead of shutting a lane down at all? And so this is a fee structure that encourages those types of right-of-way uses and encourages them to get out of the right-of-way as fast as possible to mitigate impacts to the roadway users. The other thing that the ordinance in its draft form considers today is adoption of the Phoenix Barricade Manual or a City of Casa Grande Standard Manual. One of the reasons that this may be beneficial to adopt the current Phoenix manual is it's kind of a standard across the metro Phoenix area. A lot of other cities have just adopted it as their standard. It makes it very clear what is required when a closure happens, when certain types of work need to occur, for example, potholing or right lane closures, things like that, what needs to be established on the right-of-way to do those kinds of things. Maybe one of the cons that I think of adopting the Phoenix standards is it's built for Phoenix, right? So there may be some specific case issues in Casa Grande that just doesn't make sense to use those for. And so it's something that I think we need to still kind of look at and explore and see if it makes sense to just adopt it and make exceptions in certain cases, or if we need to, as a staff, come up with our own plan on how to address those concerns in a similar way. This kind of goes over the benefits of just adopting a barricade manual in general. So public safety is a big one. It provides clear rules for those lane closures, pedestrian access, and ADA compliance. So make sure that we try to have a balanced right-of-way use mindset, right? So it's one thing to close the road, but how are we addressing the people that may be using the bike lanes? How are we addressing those that may be walking on the sidewalk? Those are things that a manual would help address on work scenarios. It also would help with infrastructure protection. It'll control how damage to new roads occurs. So it should specify what types of closures, what types of work, what types of methodologies need to be used to mitigate and to lessen those impacts. It also would establish fairness, a fairness across the board and cost recovery based on that usage and impact. It also provides that fee structure based on those violations. For example, if it's not in compliance with their original plan and they haven't established a right-of-way use plan that matches what they said they were going to, it helps make sure that that's fair across the board and standards are held to. It also gives the city a tool to point to, right? So if it's adopted as an ordinance, that gives the city the tool to say, look, this is the standard across the board for everybody that's working in the right-of-way on how it needs to occur. The other thing that the city is doing right now as the Public Works Department is updating the engineering standard plan notes. So these plan notes provide a uniform and technically accurate guidance for contractors, inspectors, and engineers as they build plans to work in the right-of-way. It also just makes things clearer so that as those designs are done and as the work is done, what the expectations are from the city in order to make those repairs or new construction items in a way that protects the city as much as possible. It also helps streamline the review process because as those are standardized, as long as you check those boxes, it's good to go and you can go through the review process faster, which is one of our main goals with this ordinance is to get people out the door as fast as possible and working as fast as possible. The other item I wanted to bring up is our updates to our standards that are really a reflection of some of these challenges. Last year we came to you to talk about some of these standards, and at that time we really focused on the roadway side of things. We've since made some new additions based on some of the practices that we're seeing in the field. So in our road series, we created a new trench plating detail that is addressing the trench plate image that you saw earlier. That tends to be a problem that we're running into pretty frequently where trench plates are skipping across the road, and that's it's due to our rural nature of our roads. We don't have curbs on a lot of them, and so they slide open, and so we've dealt with that through the standard, right, of how to make sure that those stay closed. I'm not going to go over all of these. I did want to highlight a couple of the ones made in our street series, particularly an update in our minor arterial section that includes changing the width on our minor arterial streets from 110 feet to 120 feet. And this is to accommodate those right turn lanes and things like that. And so again, as we're thinking about managing the right-of-way, what's the best way to do that to provide those transportation services and those business access and things like that to the public. A lot of these were also just revised to meet current code standards. So that's where you see a lot of these revisions from. These are, I'll touch briefly on these. These are just updates to the engineering standards that are new. So we've also included engineering standards for our water company. As we go to install in other people's right-of-way in the county, this will help that be done correctly. And then some new standards involving sewer and reclaimed water, which again, those will be built typically in city of Casa Grande right-of-way. And this will help make sure that our sewer system and the reclaimed water system as it gets built out protect those needs. So we're at next steps. What we're looking for is probably a timeline for a return to council to go over maybe a more finalized version of the draft of this ordinance. Proposed implementation schedule is something that we need. Does it happen the day of council approval, for example, or is it something that we need to take time to implement into phases to help permit applicants? We also would like some final feedback and questions on what you would like from city staff. And then kind of a timeline as well for council consideration and adoption. And so with that, I leave it open to questions and happy to answer any that you may have.
Thank you. Okay, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I've got
Sure.
a question. We always seem to have a problem with things that are buried that we don't know where they are. So is there existing ordinance or something that requires anybody that buries something in the right of way to provide a surveyed as-built?
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
great point. So today, what we're doing today, and then what this ordinance would really instill by ordinance, historically, we haven't captured an engineering plan set for a lot of those right-of-way uses. Or we capture an engineering plan set, but it misses a lot of those key details, to your point. This ordinance would now adopt essentially engineering plan standards that say this is what have to be on your engineering plans. And then to your point, as those are built, making sure that those as-built are then turned over to the city, and then we're recording those utilities in our GIS system to make sure that
Okay.
that works good for us, but then it's also not just good for the city, that allows us to really collaborate with other utility owners and right-of-way users to make sure that, to your point, things that are hidden aren't hidden anymore,
Yeah.
and we're able to identify those before the project ever starts.
Okay, good.
Yep. Great question, thank you.
Any other questions? Matt?
So we're just talking about existing right-of-way right now, not acquiring right-of-way, to be clear. So one thing that you're talking about is like redoing the permitting system. And I don't want to create, especially for the downtown where I see like an onerous permitting process, because if that happens, then we're going to get calls about doing that, because a lot of stuff happens, you know, and I'm thinking of like the Main Street Street Fair as well. I mean, they have their system, we've been doing it for years, and any, like the Rotary Oktoberfest, there's an event committee that they go through and you do all this stuff. How is that going to affect that? Is it going to increase the cost of these organizations? You know, I'm thinking like a permit for it's set in there like a newspaper thing. I mean, so we're going to start charging for every newspaper
So I think the fee.
dispenser?
I think the fee schedule part of it is still undecided, and so for something like that, I think you could do what the right-of-way management side of it. We just need to know where those things are and where they're occurring, right? And so to know that what's the risk to the city. I don't think, you know, that's ultimately up to council to adopt a change in the fee schedule. And
So when the fee schedule comes, just think about
Think
it.
about that.
Highlight that.
And to your point, I think this is a good opportunity. So today, the challenge is we have one right-of-way permit, right? And so that requires them to do all these different steps that the mindset is focused towards people working in the right-of-way. So it's very confusing right now for an
Yeah.
applicant
Okay.
because they get told, well, you're going to be performing work in the right-of-way, but they're not performing a utility construction work, right?
Right.
And so they have this permit that's designed for that aspect of it that doesn't meet 90% of what they're trying to do. And so, to your point, I think this makes it more clear for those type of permit holders on what needs to occur. And then the goal wouldn't be to make it onerous. The goal would be to make that permit easier and more applicable to the type of work that they're doing.
That makes sense. And then, and I like the part about cutting our roads, because I remember when we put Cottonwood Lane in, we were very proud of it. It was a great road. And then a utility who shall remain nameless came not much after we did it. And we do invite all the utilities when we do roads to say, hey, if you want to redo your infrastructure, now's the time to do it. And they did not. And they cut our brand new road, I think like a year. It was like a year old, right, Larry, was it? I mean, more or less. And I mean, and that kills the road. It just really drastically reduces the life. So I'm glad to see that. And also the thing about timing, because I know a section of road that I used a lot was closed. It seemed 3 months, I don't know, it was months that it was closed. And making these developers, it's not the cities, the developers that should need to be held accountable for closing these roads so people can use them, you know, that they can't use. I mean, that'll speed up their process, obviously, so.
Yeah, I think one of the key aspects with the pavement cut fee is it also encourages when those have to occur. Because at the end of the day, people need water, people need internet,
Yeah.
and so it's going to happen, and there's going to be
It's gonna happen,
At times,
but-
there's going to be a fault in planning, right? The benefit of adopting a fee for those pavement cuts is now you're encouraging trenchless technologies, right? You're saying, look, right now in the cost model, they're saying it costs me an extra this much per linear foot to do that. Well, if the fee's there, it's a wash, and so it encourages that to occur that way, which also reduces the general public that are driving it going, why, we just built this road and now we're doing more construction on the road, right? And so it keeps people out of the road and keeps the road doing what it's supposed to do, which is carry vehicles and carry people that are using the road, right?
And to Councilmember Dillon's point, all of that infrastructure he's talking about isn't the city's infrastructure, that's owned by each individual utility, so
Yeah.
it's up to them to report to us, because it makes us look bad a lot of times because they told us it was in the wrong place, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, it's not just, I mean, yes, there's been incidents with the city itself, but I've seen other situations where it was significant cost because there were so many unknown utilities that we were finding that it's nonstop. So, yeah, it usually goes back to the guy who's doing the work. So if we're doing something, or if we contracted something out, and they're just finding all these unknown utilities, well, guess who's paying for that?
Right.
It's us. So,
Typically, don't we have an overseer that sees what's going on and the issues and should be on top of that? And I know you mentioned that at the beginning.
Sure.
But sometimes we do miss some things. I do understand that. But we should have a point person from the city that's overseeing any subcontractor that we have that's working within our city, on our streets, or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah, so to maybe talk to your point a little bit, Councilmember Edwards, I think that's where that staff analysis that's being done of those processes that are occurring would be very valuable that the city management office is doing right now, because I think there's some areas where it would help define what specific roles are and then who needs to perform those roles. Just to be frank with you, we have our 3 construction inspectors that do most of that right now, but we're getting super busy, and so we have to try to manage all of that. And then at the same time, there's a lot of it that's occurring that it's not under permitted work, and so we have to go address that, and that takes a lot of our time, right? Because now we have to go back and figure out why that happened, how to address it, get them to apply for the permit post facto, and get all that information. And so that, yes, to your point, it would be great to have a one point of contact. It would be better even for our projects and coordination from the utility perspective, because if they had that one point of contact, the city can kind of facilitate those meetings and those things that need to happen, so that Arizona Water Company is talking to Southwest Gas, who's talking to Cox Communications, who's talking to everybody, right? That kind of gives.
APS.
Yeah, exactly.
Lines underground.
Yeah,
We're figuring out later, we can't complete a road because of the fact there's some lines there.
Yep.
And so.
yep.
Any other questions? Well, I just had a question on, you talk about the process. Is there, and I don't remember you covering that in here, as far as communicating those projects with the community. And an example is I had something in my neighborhood where they just had kind of barricades and just said, road closed from 9 a.m. to 5. Didn't say who it was, who was doing anything. And it was, the time period was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
And no notice.
So, and no notice. So is that included in your process?
Yeah.
Okay.
So part of this ordinance is going to help us restructure those permits to say, look, these are the requirements,
Okay.
and standardize those, right? So that it's not an unfair basis on who's working there. It's just, this is what you need to do. And so in a similar fashion, when the planning director presented some of the changes about how we're going to notify people about
Right.
building permits, we kind of want to incorporate some of those similar standards, right? If you're doing work within a certain radius, you need to make sure that those residents are notified. And then again, what does that mean? What does notification mean, right? Does that mean, I left a door hanger on their door, or does it mean that all I did was post a social media post? I mean, those are the things that I think we need to address with this ordinance, to say, here's the clear standards that need to happen every single time.
Okay, and we're facing that now with a fiber company that's in town, some of those issues. Were you gonna make a comment? Okay.
No, Madam Mayor, I was just going to ask Mr. Harmon to go back to the slide prior, and maybe we can go through some of the questions. There you go, Mac. But it looks like Councilmember Huddleston may have a question in advance of that.
Yeah, I'm just curious, back on the topic of unknowns in the ground. Is the city expected to be the sole source of in a GIS format of what's in there? And a couple directions on my question. Will this include an ordinance that requires that? And is Blue Stake still a thing?
Yeah, so to answer your question, at the end of the day, the utility owner is the responsible party for knowing where their utility is. I think the advantage that the city has is that if we collect some of that information up front, we're able to kind of be a middleman, right? We're able to say, we already know, for example, if somebody submits a plan set that they make an assumption that a line is located somewhere based on old as-built plans, the city knows, actually, that line's right here, so we're not going to approve that permit with this with your current alignment, because we know that there's a line there that needs to be moved or mitigated, right? So it allows us to catch that before shovels are ever in the ground and kind of be that middleman. To your point about 811, yes, all of those are standards across the state. So yes, before everybody digs, they have to locate things, they have to do all that. But sometimes those locations are wrong, and so that's where this process, hopefully, collecting those as-built, so that when something is built, an engineer has to certify this is where this is and where it's located, should help with some of those challenges. And right now, we don't collect those as part of our right-of-way management, and so we'd like to change that and make sure that somebody's saying, yes, this is exactly where the line's gonna be for all future right-of-way
Yeah.
users.
All right, thank you.
And Mac, you talk about, at the very beginning, about collaboration with the consultants and utility companies, and I think there was a construction company in there. So you've been working with them, getting feedback on this process, and they even thought looking at those guidelines from the city of Phoenix was a good way to go? I mean, do you feel we're gonna get pushback from people that we're too strict? Or, you know, are these reasonable changes?
Sure. I think there's definitely gonna be, putting the pavement cut fee in place is going to cost utility users when they have to use that pavement cut fee, right? So I think there's definitely gonna be a challenge with that. It's going to add costs to their projects, just plain and simple. The other side to that, though, is that I think the city can play a role where we're informing them about that and trying to give them our CIP plan in advance and try to work with them to make it to where we don't want to charge the fees, we just don't want them to cut the road, right? And so I think that can occur. As far as like the comments, yes, we worked we sent it out to almost all the major utility parties here in Casa Grande. We only got back responses from Southwest Gas and Arizona Water Company, but we're gonna continue to try to get comments from the other utility owners before we adopt. I think there's a lot of valuable comments, and probably when we come back again to go over that, I don't know if it'll be another study session or just go to ordinance. We'd like to present the council with all those comments, or at least a summary of those comments, because I think obviously there's gonna be some things that those utility companies would prefer not that we adopt, but I think again, that goes back to that scale, right? Of trying to balance the people that use the road for transportation and the residents versus the people that use the road for housing their utilities.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, Larry, did you have anything?
Yes,
Okay.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I can, just very quickly, it strikes me, and I thought I would have Mac perhaps put on his future goggles in regards to timing of this, because what I wanted to mention to in response to your question specifically, Mayor, we are just at the front end. We have a lot of ideas. This is a 30,000 elevation foot. I know that Mac and his team and Kevin and Dwayne have been working diligently on this, but until we really begin to craft the language and put it into ordinance and whatnot and talk about process, I don't know that we're going to get a lot of comments by the utilities and or the contractors. So I think that once we do that, we'll begin to vet that a little bit more with that group and certainly share that information with the council. I think tonight's presentation was to describe where we're at today and what we're proposing as a staff, and to ultimately get your direction as to whether or not we ought to move forward. It sounds like we should be moving forward with this, but I do think that there will likely be some what I would consider to be some discussions and perhaps even some amendments as we bring forward. So Mac, just thinking on a timeline, let's just say today we're starting. What would you think would be a general timeline before we could begin to bring some of that information back to the mayor and council in a study session?
I think this is gonna be challenged because I think there's gonna be some things that need to occur with our attorney's office.
Right.
As well as our finance department. For example, we talked about bonding in the ordinance, right? What does that look like? What does that look like from a staff perspective? Who holds those? The proposals with the ordinance on changes to code. Optimally, just from a goal perspective, we'd like to have something before the end of the year, because as those open occupancy permits start, it would be great to have those on a calendar cycle at the beginning of the year, right? I think a new year, new system would just be a great way to do it, but I'm not sure if that's a realistic timeline. I think we need to kind of visit with all of our departments with this ordinance and see what it looks like from their perspective, but that would be an optimal timeline.
from a new year perspective, are you talking January or July? January?
January, yeah.
So ultimately, Mayor and Council, we will begin to work through this process and have the discussions internally to bring more detail, which will include a communication plan on how we look to achieve that within the community. And at that point, we'll get your final feedback, but ultimately, you'll be asked to consider an ordinance after we've developed an ordinance that we feel is going to work best for Casa Grande.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. We'll go ahead and close this study session and start the regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Do I have to hammer that to do this? To close the meeting? I don't do it.
Why not?